Barbara Roden. I'm the editor of the Ashcroft Cache Creek Journal newspaper, and the Ashcroft Journal is the oldest continuously operating newspaper in the province. It started in 1895, May the 9th, 1895 was the first issue. And it was called the BC Mining Journal because at that time there was still a lot of interest in all sorts of parts of BC into Washington State. And the BC Mining Journal was going to cover all of that mining information for people coming to the province or looking to invest here. But right from the beginning, they always covered a lot of news from Ashcroft, Lillooet, Lytton, Clinton, all the communities in the area that didn't have their own newspapers. And over the next 4 years, they began including more local news. And finally, in 1899, the decision was made to keep the paper going, but to change the name from the BC Mining Journal to the Ashcroft Journal and cover more local news from the region. At that same time, the office moved from a small shed on Railway Avenue near 2nd and Railway to a purpose-built building that was constructed specifically for the paper to move into, to contain the printing press and the offices. And that building is right next door to the museum, and it has been the journal's home since 1899. So the paper continued through a variety of editors, and it's interesting, in those days you didn't necessarily have to have training as an editor or a journalist to own a newspaper and to edit it and write for it. You just had to be able to purchase the newspaper. So the journal had 2 or 3 different editors, owners, and then in 1912 it was purchased by a man named R.D. Cumming. Robert Deal Cumming had been born in Glasgow, Scotland. He'd come here at age 12 in 1885 with his family to help run a family grist mill at Pavilion. And Robert decided to stay in the area, and in 1903 he and his family purchased a store in Ashcroft at the corner of 4th and Railway, where Remax Realty now is, and it became R.D. Cumming's General Store. So he and his wife operated the general store until 1912, when R.D. purchased the journal and became its editor. And this wasn't too much of a stretch for him. He was already a writer. He'd written a series of stories about the area, lighthearted tales called Skookumchuck Fables. And so the opportunity to purchase the newspaper and write for it sort of fulfilled all his literary ambitions and aspirations, and it enabled him to keep his finger on the pulse of what was going on in Ashcroft and throughout the area. He was also very interested in history, and so the upper story of the journal building he turned over to a museum starting in the 1930s. And then R.D. Cumming also went on to own a movie theater here in Ashcroft. He was very keen on the latest technology when Ashcroft got its very first in-town phone system in 1914. So he was very much on the cutting edge of new technology. So the journal has been going since 1895. It's had a few name changes over the years. And when Cumming bought it in 1912, something he didn't realize was that his family was going to continue to own and operate the journal. So 3 generations of his family were the editors, owners of the Ashcroft Journal until 1978, when it was bought by what was then called Glacier Press and is now called Black Press. And it was bought by David Black as the second newspaper in his chain, and it became Black Press in 1978, still continued to operate. So every week since 1895, there has been an issue of the Ashcroft Journal. So just celebrated its 125th anniversary, 121 years in the journal building next door. And 2 years ago, we were fortunate enough to be able to get access to the upstairs floor of the journal building and find almost a complete run of the newspaper from 1895 to 1978 stored up there in really good condition, considering its age and considering it was just stored in plastic bags. And we also found dozens and dozens of posters that had been printed by the journal for events in Ashcroft, Cache Creek, Clinton, Lytton, Lillooet, Spence's Bridge, Wallachine, 108 Mile, Laclahash. So it's an amazing time capsule of the region and all the events that went on in this area. So it's really great to have had the journal here for 125 years. Who knows what newspapers will look like in another 125 years, but it's great to be a little part of history and to be able to keep the Ashcroft Journal going.